We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melting into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am very excited to welcome our next guest on the interview series, Jyl Feliciano. She is the Global Head and Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at HighSpot. Jyl, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Well, hello, Christina. I am thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me. Well, as you mentioned, I'm Jyl Feliciano, she, her, hers. And yes, I am the Vice President and Global Head of DEIB here at HighSpot. Just as an aside, HighSpot is a sales enablement platform that helps company equip, train, and coach their sales team to drive revenue growth. Okay, as a little girl, I was always fascinated with the uniquenesses that made people who they are. So I always clung to the people who were different than me because it gave me this opportunity to learn new things about the world from the window in which they saw things. I also come from a non-traditional family structure that's made up of multiple blended families. We speak different languages, we have different ability types, different ideology, educational attainment, you name it. And, I learned so much from them, and it shaped the way that I see people in the world. And little did I know it would shape who I would become as a professional. I would always go to school and tell my friends and my teachers about just the uniquenesses of my family, right? I have an uncle who is visually impaired, and I learned how to read in Braille when I was younger, or help him navigate through a simple grocery store shopping experience. And I would go and just tell the world about it. So in 8th grade, I made up my mind that I wanted to be a news anchor and a journalist because I enjoy telling stories and helping people understand others' viewpoints.
I love that. There is so much uniqueness there, and also just the foundation of where you grew up has a kind of really big impact on kind of where you are today as well. And we know that everybody has different experiences, different backgrounds. And fast forward to today, when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and in the workplace as well, people are bringing that to the forefront. And I think a lot of folks are talking about how we create this psychologically safe place where folks feel like they can bring their X amount of work of themselves to work. What are kind of key pillars of a sustainable and intentional strategy to really set your workplace up to have that psychological safety? Because we don't just have, doesn't just happen because you have that, you want it to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, at HighSpot, psychological safety is really at the forefront of all of our DEI and B efforts. When I think about the pillars or the tenets of psychological safety, 4 things come to mind, right? One, you have to know that you'll be accepted and included as you are, that you can bring your full self to work each and every day and belong. The second is being able to learn, grow, and make mistakes without consequence, right? We're all human, so making mistakes is inevitable. The third thing is feeling safe to share your abilities and your ideas, knowing that your voice will be heard and respected, right? It will count. And then the last thing is really feeling safe to challenge the status quo and opinions, no matter who is in the room, right? Whether your CEO is in the room to your intern. So as we think about those pillars, we use those to create psychological safety or kind of that strategy in our organization by working with our leadership team and managers on how to be vulnerable. It's about humanizing the work experience. When our leaders are vulnerable, when they talk about their experiences, their fears, their challenges, and their mistakes, it gives these silent signals to their team that those behaviors are accepted. So we're really looking at leaning with empathy and honesty, and our teams for sure are a reflection of their leaders. And we start to see leaders mimicking those behaviors, and their teams will mimic it back to them. It's like a mirror. So we're just making it a part of our language and how we talk, and applauding high spotters who are speaking up and amplifying their voices and knowing that they're respected and heard because we take action. So those are kind of the tenets of psychological safety, as well as the strategy that we're implementing to make sure that those behaviors are accepted, adopted, and just the way that we work.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with you that teams are reflections of their leaders. Modeling is really important as well in terms of the behavior that you are rewarding, what you're celebrating. And if you're also leading with vulnerability and empathy, kind of showing how you make mistakes and sharing what you learn from them as well, and cultivating that environment. And I think that we all have kind of unique roles to play in this work as well. It's not just Jill's responsibility to make sure that HighSpot is an equitable place. That is not the goal of this work, but I want to kind of ask your opinion in terms of employers. What is the unique role of employers to create more equity in the world, kind of at large?
Yeah, so companies now, I feel, have the power to shape the communities in which they operate and the world in which we all live. But in order to create equity in the world, employers must start first inside of their own companies. Employers can begin to create a more equitable workplace by recognizing that they don't know everything. I think that's really what the world events have taught us, and how we're really talking about people and who they are outside of the workplace, inside of the workplace.
Right.
Like, we're recognizing that we just don't know everything, and that's okay. And we're finding that, and there's plenty of data out there that suggests that homogeneous groups make decisions and policies that have an impact on a broader range of people who have very different experiences and needs. So by coming to the table, releasing any ego or fears, and being willing to learn and open up the seats at the table for others to represent and share their differences is really the key to starting that work internally. An example of that is at HighSpot, we now have developed multiple employee communities. And as we begin to think about new policies and benefits and perspectives and way of working, we are sure to bring different backgrounds and experiences to the table. Because if we build a process from the start that is inclusive and has those elements of equity, then that process forever will be equitable, right? And live and breathe in the organization. So we're trying to do things right the first time and making sure that we're making room for everyone to be at the table, so that equity is at the forefront of just how we make business decisions.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right, that organizations have such a kind of responsibility and also an opportunity to have a really positive impact in the communities that they're in as well. Partner with organizations too, to your point of not knowing everything, like partnering with folks who are doing the work. And I think a lot of partnerships come from recruitment. A lot of partnerships come from those employee communities working with organizations as well. I know when we kind of previously talked, something that we definitely wanted to discuss was kind of shifting that mindset from some companies thinking that diversity recruiting is the end all be all, and it isn't. But tell me about how people should really be thinking about diversity recruiting as an outcome, and how it's not about setting quotas and setting up your workplace really for success and retention of folks, which is just as important.
Yeah, I am extremely passionate about this question. Plain and simple, people aren't percentages. And what we saw in the world post George Floyd's murder is companies willing to take a stand and thinking about inequities within their workplace and recognizing that representation, in fact, was an area of improvement. And what we saw as a result is companies began to unveil their representation data, right? And by doing that, it sparked this movement around, oh my gosh, we have to recruit more diverse talent, especially, across different gender types and racial backgrounds, with an emphasis of people of color. And I think that's, a wonderful thing, but it's not about the data and just going to find people to come into your organization. Diversity recruiting, you're right, is an outcome of an organization's ability to do 4 or 5 things. Yes, it's about pipelining diverse talent and having the right data to understand how those demographics are progressing through your recruiting funnel. But it's also about, the capabilities of your recruiting team and your hiring managers. So yes, making sure your processes are equitable and if folks are trained up on their own bias and their role in the process. The third thing is really looking internally in your culture. Are you creating a space where those demographics want to come and stay? See, that's the piece that's actually attractive. Yes, you can talk to me about your representation numbers all day, but tell me how many of these communities are staying? How are you thinking about developing them? What are their employee engagement scores, right? Those are the pieces that truly attract diverse talent. And if we can really stick that piece, diversity recruiting will take off, right? So it's really that outcome of your ability to build an attractive and equitable workforce that people want to come and stay.
Absolutely. You don't want a revolving door of talent, and you don't want people to feel like they were sold a different story in the recruitment process. It's
Sure.
an outcome. You mentioned hiring managers, recruiters, and folks just at the company who create the culture everybody is a part of. What is your advice for organizations and also leaders, I would say especially managers, to really hold themselves accountable in this equity work?
Yeah, well, it's common for companies to create, DEI goals, right? But I think, when you talk about holding yourself accountable, what's evident is those companies who can drive different behavior changes and hold themselves accountable for showing up and doing the work with a lens of inclusion. I can build a process all day, but if we're not following the process in a way that we're holding ourselves accountable, we're thinking about other people and who they are and their experiences, then you're not going to see a lot of movement. So I think accountability is really continuing these conversations at the forefront. Yes, data is a piece of it, but how we're getting to the data needs to be a conversation. I've spoken with different DEI practitioners, and this is a topic we often talk about, and recognizing that you actually can move behavior outside of data. So for instance, if my CEO asks me every time we meet, hey, Jyl, how are you thinking about developing a diverse team with different skills and abilities and experiences? And that's the first question he asks me during every conversation. I know it's important, right? And I'm going to drive the right behaviors. I'm going to research and educate myself, and I'm going to be a part of learning how I show up as an inclusive leader during the selection process. So I think it's conversations, it's talking about it, top of mind, that also holds us accountability for driving results as well as having targets in place.
Absolutely. You have to provide context behind it. And I think that goes behind to your earlier point as well, behind storytelling and really, asking how employees are feeling and consistently kind of asking what their experience is at the organization. When we're talking about behavior changes, we know this doesn't happen overnight, but you have folks like the CEO of the organization, other senior leaders asking, how do we know if we're doing a good job? How do we know what to invest in? Where are we making progress? What is your kind of overall philosophy around measuring diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, knowing that this is a continuous journey? We're not looking to check box here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to layer on to just the point earlier as we transition into this question, but at HighSpot, I have been thrilled that you'll find employees at all levels being a part of this conversation, right? Down to your individual contributors and your interns. Surprisingly, as I joined the organization, I would have interns put 15 minutes on my calendar and they're like, hey, can we talk about what DEIB means to HighSpot and the role that I am going to play? And you start to see them amplifying their voices and influencing their leaders. So we're really taking this organizational ownership approach to having conversations across the board, across different levels and regions across the globe. So wanted to add that piece into it. When you talk about measuring DEI and B initiatives, you have your traditional talent acquisition metrics, so setting representation targets that you're working to. I think that you should set goals in a 3-year increment. The reason being is over a course of 3 years, it gives you room to learn, to grow, to practice, and to make mistakes, right? But within that 3 years, you can also spend the time building the cultural capabilities that you need to put in place to really make sure that not only you can bring in talent, but you also keep them at the same time. We're also looking at, DEI, and we all recognize that there is no finish line. But what we've observed is every 3 years, just the trends and needs of employees change dramatically, right? So give yourself that 3 year period to get there. So outside of representation and recruiting, it's really looking at our employee engagement scores, right? To understand the experience. I think it's important that you slice and dice that employee experience by age, gender type, racial ethnicity makeup, caregiver status, veteran status, ability type. So it's really important to just see what the experiences are from the intersectionality of people. And I think that's one thing that is newer as we start to welcome the whole person to work. But I think if companies can just really look at those demographics from those different perspectives, it gives us an indicator on trends that we can get ahead of if we should be trending, downward. But we also can leverage the best practices from one subgroup to the next, right? So those are kind of how we think, or I think about DEI initiatives and just how you measure it in a way that matters and will drive change.
Absolutely. I think in a way that matters is really important to emphasize. If you have kind of a response rate or employee engagement of 80%, that might look great. But if the 20% are all of your people of color, they're the women at your organization, and all the caregivers, it is not great. We need to improve upon that as well. So really understanding, slicing the data as you are talking about, and then improving the experience for everyone. There's so much research, for example, around when you improve the workplace for parents who are working, you improve it for everybody. And folks have been consistently auditing the employee experience, especially over the last few years, to see what's working, what's not. Business as usual is pretty much out the window as an excuse to not kind of change things. Can you tell me about how you've redesigned a system to be more equitable at HighSpot, whether it's a process, policy, or initiative?
Yeah, absolutely. I talked about this earlier in our discussion, but I have to go back here because I think it's such an important part of our ability to bring culture and belonging through this evolution that we're on at HighSpot. And I think as we think about kind of what's happening in the world, right? We have new world of work and kind of the return to office movement. We've had a season of focusing and really continuing to focus on racial injustice. We're looking at gender disparities and inequality from a benefits and hiring and retention perspective. I mean, you name it, right? Now we talk about caregivers in the workplace, right? That's a new topic that's emerged. And as we think about the new modern day employee, oh boy, they're different, or their needs are just so different. So as we think about building new benefits, we're bringing those thought leaders to the table. We have appointed specific employees in the organization as cultural champions, whether they're leaders of our employee resource groups. We've started a inclusion and belonging council and a few other employee groups. So we've identified who those champions are. And we've equipped them, we've supported them, and they have agreed to come to the table with our executive leaders, myself, and other key stakeholders to reimagine processes. Currently, we're actually redesigning our performance management process. So what does that look like? Well, we had representation from different career levels, identity groups, ability types, work with an external consultant to share best practices and their experiences. And those insights will actually lead and feed into how we reimagine our new process and development. And I think what's really great there is employees will see the end result. It's the end result of their championing and amplifying their voice and seeing that we're considering who they are and their unique needs and that they've changed and they evolved. So I think that follow through and just seeing that end product is going to be the thing that signals to employees that our organization is serious about getting this right. and making sure that this place truly is equitable so I can show up as my authentic self.
Absolutely. I think that definitely makes sense in terms of asking and listening. And then for the end result, okay, where is this kind of going as well? How are you kind of active listening to employees? And then to your point, in terms of the kind of new modern employee, just those expectations around the employer and organization, those mutual conversations are a need to have as well. And that's a shift over the last few years. We know there's so much data around kind of what folks are looking for in the relationships to their employer as well. More than 60% of employees say it is really important for a company to share in the caring for not only their job, but families and communities. So how does HighSpot really show up for the full lives of employees there as well?
Yeah, this is a really great question. At HighSpot, we're a company of parents, spouses, friends, leaders, allies, activists, and much, much more. And to be a human-centered organization, we need to show up for the whole person, right? That notion of check your profession or your personal life at the door is gone. And it doesn't exist at HighSpot, which I'm really proud of. An example of this is recently there has been a number of horrific world events that we as professionals have been impacted by, whether it's the recent school shooting or it's the violence against different racial groups. We feel that when we walk into work every day. And traditionally, I think companies really ignored that part and expect folks to just show up, crank out their deliverables, be engaged, on camera. And we're like, no. It's okay to be human. And we're going to acknowledge the fact that some things are happening in the world. So during those times of crisis, we lead different listening sessions. We're very thoughtful about obviously our communication strategy, but we pull employees together who are directly or indirectly impacted by world events. And we create buddy systems so that we can, have someone to walk away with and actually have follow-up discussions. But in that moment, we are talking about our feelings. We're processing together. We're sharing resources. We're confirming that we don't have to go through this alone. And I think for our employees, that piece is very powerful to say, it's okay to be human. We're going to create the space for you to step into psychological safety and actually talk about this and process. And then thirdly, we're going to make sure as you walk away from this conversation that you're equipped with additional support to making sure that managers know how to talk about crisis and know how to support employees, even if they should need to step away, for a day to two and process, that's okay. So I think that is an example of really humanizing and bringing people's whole self to work.
Absolutely. That's a great example of putting people first and also really equipping, like you said, managers to have these conversations, creating the space to really talk about how folks are feeling with everything that's going on outside of their kind of day-to-day jobs as well. We know our work is just one part of our lives, and so many folks are wearing different hats. And you mentioned everything that's kind of going on in the world at large too. And I think that in itself is a major shift in kind of talking about where we are at work and with our coworkers as well. And we know that there's a lot of innovation in the people, talent, culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion space. Is there any other kind of innovations that you are most excited by?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, I've been in the DEI field for the last 17 years. So I've seen the evolution of this work transform in a beautiful way, to be quite frank. What really excites me this go round is data transparency. And data transparency, and I know we talked about this earlier, but it keeps us accountable, not only as a company, but as an industry. And it's something refreshing about that. Now, what's really unique about this movement towards data transparency right now is that companies aren't expected to have it all together. It's a continuous process where we're seeing organizations start to leverage their data to tell the story, hold themselves accountable, share best practices, and just show the effort, right, and intention around movement. This is going to change the landscape of the workplace as well as the world. Your candidates, your internal employees, your stakeholders, your clients, they're all asking questions now about culture and diversity and equity, right? Like it is a deciding factor of how people see and interact with companies and that company's brand. Now is the time to get open and real, which is one of our guiding principles at HighSpot. And it's exciting that we're beginning to have these conversations that we have historically shied away from due to fear, right? But when we talk about it, we break down barriers of understanding and we show this level of humility and empathy that I think will take us a long way. So data transparency is what excites me after the 17 years in this space.
I love it. Data transparency, when we break down those barriers, we also strengthen and create those real connections with people as well that go really for miles as well. We are in June 2022. We've talked a lot about ensuring that folks feel seen, heard, and understood. And I'm sure this is something that you're doing at HighSpot. It sounds like 365 days a year in terms of supporting employees and specifically LGBTQIA+ employees. How is HighSpot honoring and celebrating Pride this year?
Yeah, well, at HighSpot, you're right. Pride isn't just something we recognize during June. We strive and make an effort to support and celebrate the LGBTQIA+ community every day, as well as all other communities. But how we're celebrating Pride this year is our Pride Spot. ERG is hosting a number of events. So there is a karaoke drag show that is planned in person. We are so excited about that. And what's really neat about this drag show is it will follow a karaoke battle between our executive leaders. So it's this culmination of acceptance across career level, right? And giving people permission to be who they are. So I'm really excited about that. We are also relaunching our employee resource groups. So as I mentioned, Pride Spot, we've restructured those groups to now be strategic business partners. They are appropriately funded. They have executive sponsorship and they have specific goals that they want HighSpot to hit, right? Talk about data transparency. So we're going to continue to talk about the movement around benefits and language uses and how we, capture data that's relevant and important to the experience of this community in our organization. So we're really thrilled about that. Some of our community members are also hosting a Wikipedia edit-a-thon where employees can help us update queer Wikipedia articles. We did it last year and the attendance was great and it was a blast, but also a really great learning experience for us all. We're also bringing in speakers to talk about and provide education around current events regarding legislation within Florida and some of the anti-LGBTQIA+ unfriendly, laws and bills. And we're learning to understand kind of our role in it and how we support the community as, these laws are made. And then lastly, we're going to have a book club and we will focus on a book centered around different experiences within the communities. And we're going to have conversations around what we learned from that book. So I am really thrilled, really fun, really engaging and educational, but just a culmination of just how our organization thinks about inclusion, right? We're all doing this together. And I can't wait to share more on LinkedIn.
That's awesome. It sounds like a very holistic kind of strategy and also just a way to make sure, there's education, there's programming, there's celebration, there's policy, and there's a lot of ways that folks can raise their hand to be involved and really show up as well. Jyl, I've really enjoyed our conversation as we kind of near the end. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to share with folks who are listening or underscoring any kind of key takeaways about data transparency, employee listening, what you're seeing in this space before we end?
Yeah, I think just two things. One, building a culture of inclusion and belonging does not have to be hard. It's a journey and it takes a lot of work. and effort, which is okay. Those who are willing to put in the time and the effort to learn, to make mistakes, to stand back up, to really lean in with critical curiosity, those are the organizations and leaders and people who will really make movement in this space, right? So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. The second thing is we as people can learn how to exercise a level of openness, humility, and gratitude for others. This is truly the cornerstone for making culture what it is in the workplace and in our personal lives, to be quite frank. There is data, playbooks, training, but until we can experience those qualities and sit down to have human-centric conversations with one another, seeking to understand is really the lens in which we all need to see the world and the way that we can really leverage how we see others and how we show up, how we think, and how we advocate for the things that we need, but the things that other people around us need.
I love that. The time is now, and it does not have to be hard. Lead with humility, lead with vulnerability. And I think that is two really great key kind of takeaways to end our conversation. Jyl, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood, and know it's a requirement for the business to really succeed overall. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.